And let me introduce, please, our second talk today by fabulous Maurice Pomerantz, who is doing Arabic literature studies, if I'm not wrong, in NYU Abu Dhabi. And he's going to talk about some graffiti from Abbasid, Baghdad.
Thank you, everyone.
Applause, please.
Lately, I've been the sort of midwife of other people's lectures. One of the things I do at New York University, Abu Dhabi, is I run something called the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute, which has public lectures twice a week, Mondays and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. throughout. There are around 50 here in Abu Dhabi, around 30 in New York. Check them out. They're long form, they're academic. They're really interesting. And I guess as a result of that, in terms of framing, my scholarly self often is repressed or suppressed. And I beg your indulgence for what is, I think, a talk of the old-fashioned kind. That is, it has a sort of argument to it, or at least it's about the poetics of script. How script was understood, how graffiti was understood in the past. When I was talking to Anna about this gathering, immediately a book came to my mind. I'm an expert in the Arabic literature of the 10th century, and it just so happens that among the most charming books of this distant past is a small compendium called the Book of Strangers, Kitab Adab al-Ghuraba. I immediately thought of it in relation to this theme because it's mainly devoted to stories and anecdotes surrounding graffiti and its meanings. The book has been, that is, it's all about people in various places, often strangers, writing something on a wall of a tavern or a church about their feelings of estrangement and loneliness in the world. We'll get to that point later. The book has been attributed to Abul Faraj al-Isfahani, the great collector of Arabic poetry of the 10th century, but it can't possibly be his. The author seems to travel places after Abul Faraj has died, so unless we believe in ghosts, it's probably a different author. And it's been translated beautifully by Patricia Krona, who passed away several years ago, who's a friend. Now, the author, and this person lives clearly 10th century Iraq and Iran, the author states what he is doing in collecting this. So this is an anthology, a collection of stories. He says, he notes that this anthology relates to those individuals who are feeling themselves to be strangers and then recorded their sufferings on walls, and also taverns and gardens. It's a little bit broader. The compiler notes that it has been the habit of strangers in every time to do this, and now it is, and remember that, in every time, and now it is his responsibility as himself a stranger to imitate their act by composing this book, which is a compilation of stories related to this group. The stories of this volume are delightful, and in fact, we could probably spend an hour here relating stories, and that's what I initially wanted to do. But I saw something, I think, a little bit more interesting in this collection. Now, often anthologists put the first story in an anthology often is pregnant with meaning, if I can use that expression. It often relates in a sort of meta way to the entire collection. And this is true for what we will call pseudo-Isfahani, this collection. And it's a story about the Abbasid Caliph al-Ma'mun, great 9th century caliph, ruler of the world. And it's related on the authority of one of the men in the caliph's army. He writes, I was in the army of the Caliph al-Ma'mun when the latter marched to Byzantium. He and I entered an old church in Syria. Let's see if we can, something like that, which had marvelous paintings, and in which he walked around at length. When it was time to leave, he said to me, when strangers on journeys and people far removed from their friends and companions enter a well-known place and a famous site, it is their habit to leave behind a record of their presence in order to seek blessing in the prayers of other strangers. So exactly what the book is about. travelers and people bereft of kith and kin. I want to join in, said the caliph, so give me a pot of ink. Then he wrote the following verses midway on the altar gate. O strangers, may God grant you safe return. And may you soon meet your loved ones. My heart has been afflicted with pity and fear for you. May God heal it by bringing you to safety. I wrote in order to support you, so when you read it, know that it was I who wrote it. The poem is unsigned. Now, this is a very quaint story. I'm used to reading good stories. Abbasids are great storytellers. And I think, as I mentioned, the story encapsulates the themes of the book that he's going to, this collection. We can note here a couple of other things. The caliph was on a military campaign, and he's the most powerful man on earth, and he was overcome in this sacred hall by a sense of uncertainty and perhaps even a hope that all the travelers around him would return to their homes. So we kind of see the caliph acting as a man. Remember that. Lest we imagine that this was simply an exercise in propaganda for the caliphs, and there were many of those, we have evidence discovered recently that suggests that the story related about Al-Ma'mun is not so far from a truth. In the far northwest of Saudi Arabia, on the plain of Hisma, scholars recently came across some startling finds. And in case you've never been to Hisma, and I haven't, but I'm going to book my tickets soon. This is what Hisma looks like. It's sort of, it's from this wonderful site called alsahra.org. People actually traveling around the Hajj routes, recording inscriptions. I'll tell you a little bit later, right now, about them. The landscape to me, from a pop culture reference, looks like the cartoons of Wile E. Coyote. They're amazing. I could just. There's some new graffiti and one thing I'd like to point out is graffiti tends to attract graffiti. I think we all know that. From if you've been in a bathroom stall, you know that. Sorry, pardon the crude reference, but this is some new graffiti, but there are other signs of graffiti attracting graffiti that is very, very old. Now, as of 2016, and I'm sure this number has now changed, the number of early graffiti securely dated to the 1st century. So these are graffiti that have dates on them, okay, are roughly 30. However, what this team has been doing was actually looking in biographies of the early, not the companions of the prophet, but the followers of the prophet, and finding similar names. There's a particular form that these graffitos take. Often, as you can see at the top, if you can read it, the first word is ana, I, Abdurrahman ibn al-Qais, I. It's very interesting. Often there's a pious wish, attached to them. Amintu billah al-azim wahdahu. My name is Abdurrahman ibn al-Qais, and I have believed in God, exalted and singular. Interestingly, perhaps you can guess where this is going. Among these names, now, they could be homonyms, of course, but the form is very old. In fact, the writing, if you've read 1st century papyri, which I did in graduate school, very haltingly, I'll get to that. Anna. If you can read that, it happens to be this person. This is not, this graffiti here, this graffito, sorry. Let's see if I go back. Is set apart, it's alone, it seems. I haven't visited the site, obviously, but that's what the scholars say, is in the form of Ana Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. It's set apart. It lacks any pious invocations. You know what else it also lacks? The title of the caliph. This was the ruler of the Muslim world from 685 to 705. Man probably most famous for Arabizing the Diwan. This is his picture, again, on coinage. Whoops. Oh, I'll get to that, sorry. Don't want to spoil the show. That's him, whoops. That's him. From an old form called the Standing Caliph Dinar. Now, this inscription, I think, it could be a homonym, but boy, it has some very old features to it. Let me go back. One of the features for Arabic readers, do you notice something there? Marwan is missing an aleph. Of course, if you've read old Qur'ans, this is standard. It's called, or you know, in the business, they call it the aleph defectiva. I'm not sure why you would say that, but that's what they call it. And that's very interesting. It's typical of early Kufic styles. That lack of title, though, and I ask you, why is the caliph missing his title, Amir al-Mu'mineen? Now, Frédéric Imbert, who's a major scholar of these inscriptions, and actually from whose article I was alerted to this inscription, explains it that this must come from the time before he is the caliph. Now, that's possible. I'd also like you to think about the poetics of graffiti and inscriptions. I'd like you to think about the fact that the Caliph al-Ma'mun did not sign his poem. I'd like you to think about the fact that this graffito is surrounded by many others, yet set apart from them. I wonder if it's not the Caliph saying something like, I am one of you, I am like you, I am a fellow traveler, I am a gharib. Sounds like something Abdul Malik might do, but Allahu Alam. Now, I wanted to also think a little bit about poetry. Actually, you mentioned Huda, you mentioned poetry, and of course, in this case, al-Ma'mun wrote. He had an ink pot, and he wrote on the walls. Inscriptions, of course, etched inscriptions were very different. Often they have. In pre-Islamic time, they have curses attached to them. No one should erase this, or something like that. But we'll get to that. But I wanted to talk a little bit about poetry, because poetry is, of course, an enduring thing. And why does it make sense that al-Ma'mun was writing poetry, or is this just an affectation of an Abbasid era book? I mean, they love putting things in poetry, actually. Poetry's great. But there are examples, of course, of. Let's see if I can, here, like this one. There are examples of poem inscriptions, like this one. I can't really go through it right now. I don't know if we'll have enough time, but we can go back to it if you'd like. What's really interesting is it's kind of written in this kind of labyrinthine way, which actually makes me think of exactly what you were saying, this kind of. It was almost meant as a place to stop and wonder. This is old. This is Umayyad period. It predates al-Ma'mun's activity by around 100 years. I kind of imagine that if al-Ma'mun was writing with a pen on a wall in a church, he would have done something beautiful. Okay. We can go a little bit deeper into the past. Pseudo-Isfahani, actually, this collection, tells some stories about stopping in the desert and seeing, and he's got these wonderful accounts of someone, it's actually Al-Asma'i, the great philologist, went into the desert, and he found a rock, and on that rock was something written in Thamudic, this older script. And then he found an answer to it in Arabic, like a conversation across time. Remember, we said graffiti cluster. I wanted to bring that up because the Arabic graffiti of Hisma and now that are being discovered are their Arabic graffiti in the script of what we now, I don't know what we'll call it, Arabic, Proto-Arabic. This is Proto-Arabic at the bottom. And at the top, Thamudic. So ancient North Arabian scripts, and now we could probably call it, I'd like to call it the modern Arabic script. But it's not just inscriptions from pre-Islamic Arabia that are being found that are in prose. And I'll leave you with this thought. This inscription, which, by the way, is also somewhat labyrinthine, this is called boustrophodon writing that goes in as the ox plows. That's what it means in Greek. It was deciphered because in some ways, I would say, however, by my colleague Ahmed Jalad from Ohio State University. When he did that, he found out that this was actually a poem. And it wasn't just any kind of poem. It was a poem that looked a lot like the poetry of pre-Islamic Arabia. That is, it looked like the poems that we read about in the anthology of Abu Tamam, his Hamasa. It's about war, about the glory of dying in battle. Something you'd mark, a poem you might mark if you're wandering through the desert and you want someone to remember you. And to my mind, I find that very beautiful. Early Muslims must have wandered through these deserts. They might not have understood what these inscriptions meant anymore, or maybe some did. There's a fantasy in one of these texts that, Al-Asma'i actually gets a translator and figures out what the script is. I don't know. The scripts, by the way, are now known to be contemporaneous. So that's at least one of the more recent theories, that as ancient North Arabian was dying out, Nabatean, and I showed you actually what looks like a bilingual. It's not been studied yet. We're going to learn more about that, I hope. I'm excited to find out about that. But if you'd like to wrap it all up, you can say that the poetics of graffiti are a continuum. It takes us back to the past of the Safavidic poem, and the feelings of El Ma'mun are roughly the same. Graffiti was a moment where you could talk about the self. And I find that rather lovely. And I'll leave you just with that thought. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Maurice. It was a very exciting talk, and we have a couple of minutes for your questions, so please let me know. I see one person over there, and he goes first.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I have a question. How do you see the modern graffiti? How do you think that the contemporary graffiti is applied in urban context today, especially in this part of the world where it's not spontaneous, it's more like, I would say, like controlled? So how do you see that happening?
Oh, that's far from my expertise, but I wonder actually a little bit about graffiti in general. Like even our use of the term for this material is loaded. And I wonder if maybe if I can help this conversation move forward. I wonder why the translators, I'm a translator, so why do the translators of this book, Pseudo Isfahani, immediately chose graffiti for it? I immediately thought of graffiti. But I wonder because these texts that I'm talking about are at the sort of, are they private? Are they public? Are they monumental, or are they occasional? I think actually the things I've talked about, many fall along a spectrum. One thing that they do share, I think, with, let's say the modern graffiti art, is that something about their staying power and also their fragility is central to their being. And I think that's something really interesting. As I said, even these etched graffiti, actually, they often have a curse in the pre-Islamic, these inscriptions, like, whoever erases this, may he be damned. And interesting and fascinating, that's not true of the early Islamic inscriptions, at least the ones that I've looked at. And you might wonder about that. What does that say about about these feelings about the material world? So I guess I'll leave it there. I'm not an expert in the modern graffiti. I mean, I've lived in New York, and I did see there was a small patch of graffiti I could see from my apartment in Abu Dhabi, but it was quickly erased.
Thank you, but I can unveil a bit about our next speaker, who is actually a contemporary graffiti writer, as well as a calligraphy artist. And do we have any more questions, or shall we proceed?
First, I want to thank you, because you're as good as the storytellers in the Abbasid times. It was really fascinating listening to you. And I think, yeah, it's very interesting what you showed, because indeed there are graffitis, but like if I would compare them to graffitis in Amsterdam, where it's just a signature of a person, here there's a statement and a story.
Yes.
And it's an interesting, I know from the work of Jalad that they discovered a whole desert full of them, like stones everywhere with stories and stories and stories. And it's interesting because they are kind of poetic again. They're not just, my name is so-and-so. No. They have, like, they tell who they are, and they have their thought and what they are doing. And so they kind of function also like, I don't know, maybe for what do you call these guys? For somebody who's studying like sociology, no. Anyway, they tell a story about the culture of that period. It's very interesting to read them because it gives you an idea what people were doing and thinking. And so they also have a historical value beyond just the person venting whatever they're feeling.
I'd say, in response to that, what's been shocking for me and my colleagues who've studied pre-Islamic poetry and been exposed to this idea that, from Ibn Qutayba, poetry is the diwan of the Arabs. That is, it is their record. However, this too is a record. This too is something that people did. This too was marking a space. This too was attempting to inscribe oneself in the world. This too was, and all of that I think is very profound, mainly because we hadn't yet found this record. And, I find that very interesting, that the themes might be, in some cases, the same. And in fact, not only between pre-Islamic poetry written in Arabic and these inscriptions, but even more so that there's a continuity from pre-Islamic Arabia into the Abbasid period. And I've always known that, but I never realized how much that was the case. Thank you.